I cannot believe what just happened. My father, the man who promised to always support me, disowned me on my wedding day. I watched as my world crumbled, my dreams crushed, and my happiness dismissed. They told me that marrying the man I love would ruin our family name, and suddenly, I was nothing. But life has a way of turning the tables. 6 months later, everything changed in a way I never could have imagined. And you will not believe what my father did next. Are you ready? Drop in the comments where you are watching from before I start my story. My name is Emily. I am 30 years old and I live in New York City. I thought I had everything under control, but I was wrong. My father is a CEO, a man whose decisions have shaped my entire life. He has always demanded perfection from me, and I believed that as long as I followed his rules, I would be safe. I met Daniel 5 years ago. He is kind, smart, and hardworking, but he does not come from wealth. I loved him with all my heart. I thought my father would understand because he had always said that love is the most important thing. I was wrong. The moment I announced our engagement, his face changed. There was no warmth, no excitement, no congratulations. Instead, he looked at me with a cold, distant expression that I had never seen before. He told me that I had disappointed him, that I had brought shame to the family name. I tried to reason with him, to explain that Daniel is a good man who loves me and will support me in every way. He would not listen. He said that I was making a mistake and that from now on, I was on my own. He said that I would receive no financial support, no family help, nothing. I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces. I could not believe that my father, the man who had been my guide and protector, could turn his back on me so completely. I felt lost, abandoned, and terrified. Daniel held my hand and told me that we would get through this together. His words gave me a small amount of strength, but the pain of losing my father's support was immense. I left his office that day feeling as if the ground beneath me had disappeared. For weeks, I could not eat properly, and I barely slept. I kept thinking about what I had done wrong, why my father could not see the man I loved for who he truly is. Every memory of my childhood, every lesson he had taught me, suddenly felt tainted by the realization that he only cared about money, status, and appearances. Daniel never judged me, never criticized me. He simply reminded me that we were building our life together, and that nothing outside of our love could destroy us. I promised myself that I would focus on our future, that I would not let my father's anger control my happiness. We started saving, planning, and dreaming. Every day was a struggle, but we faced it together. Little did I know that 6 months later, the tables would turn in a way that even I could not imagine, and the very man who had cast me aside would be begging for something from the one he had always looked down upon. The first few weeks after my father disowned me were the hardest I have ever faced. Daniel and I were determined to make our life work, but reality hit us hard. We had to find a small apartment, budget every dollar, and make sacrifices that I had never imagined before. I remember sitting at the tiny kitchen table one evening, counting bills and wondering how we would survive. Daniel looked at me with calm determination and said, "Emily, we will get through this. We have each other, and that is stronger than anything money can buy." His words gave me hope, but the pain of losing my father's support still weighed heavily on my heart. I tried to keep busy at work, focusing on my career and proving to myself that I could stand on my own. Every phone call, every family event I missed reminded me of the life I had lost. My friends offered comfort, but nothing replaced the void left by my father's rejection. I found myself questioning everything I had believed about family, loyalty, and love. Could a parent truly turn their back on their child so completely? I could not answer that question, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. Daniel encouraged me to start small projects at home, and together we built a life that, while modest, was filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. Slowly, I began to realize that my happiness did not depend on my father's approval. One evening, as we shared a simple meal, Daniel smiled and said, Look at what we have created together. This is ours, and it is beautiful." I could not help but smile back, feeling a flicker of pride and determination. I decided to focus on what I could control: our love, our work, and our future. As months passed, we faced challenges that tested our patience, resilience, and faith in each other. There were days when I wanted to give up, to call my father and beg for his support, but I refused. I promised myself that I would never allow anyone to diminish my worth again. Then, one morning, a surprising email appeared in my inbox. It was from my father's office. I hesitated to open it, my heart racing with fear and anger. When I finally read it, I could hardly believe my eyes. He wanted to meet Daniel. He wanted to discuss a business matter. Suddenly, the man who had refused to acknowledge my marriage was reaching out to the very man he had looked down upon. I felt a mixture of shock, curiosity, and an almost indescribable sense of vindication. 6 months of struggle, sacrifice, and growth had brought us to this moment. Daniel had no idea that my father's pride had been wounded and that he would come crawling. I took a deep breath, knowing that this meeting could change everything. But I also knew that we were no longer the powerless couple he had tried to dismiss. We were strong, capable, and united. And I was ready to see how the tables would turn. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves, anticipation, and quiet satisfaction. Daniel and I arrived at my father's office, a building that always felt imposing and untouchable to me. The lobby was pristine, filled with marble floors and polished surfaces that reflected the authority and wealth of my family. My father was waiting in his corner office, his expression unreadable. As we walked in, I could feel his eyes on Daniel, the same way he had looked at me months ago, with judgment, disbelief, and unspoken doubt. Daniel, however, remained calm, confident, and unshaken. I realized in that moment how much he had grown, how much we had grown together, and I felt proud. My father greeted Daniel with a stiff handshake, one that lacked warmth but carried a subtle desperation I had not noticed before. He wasted no time getting to the point. He explained that a new business opportunity had arisen, one that required immediate investment, connections, and trust. I could sense his tension, his unease, and I realized that he had come to us because he believed Daniel could help. He spoke about strategy, numbers, and deadlines, but beneath the words, I could feel the real motive. He needed Daniel's support, advice, and influence to succeed. Daniel listened quietly, nodding, asking precise questions, and offering insight that impressed my father. I watched as the dynamic shifted subtly, the power slowly moving from him to us. I realized then that our struggles, our perseverance, and our growth had not gone unnoticed. 6 months ago, my father had dismissed us, belittled our efforts, and refused to see our potential. Now, he had no choice but to respect the man I had chosen, the life we had built, and the strength we had gained. The meeting lasted longer than I expected. We discussed plans, options, and agreements, but every moment carried a silent, unspoken tension. I could sense my father calculating, weighing his need against his pride, and I knew that he would never admit how much he relied on Daniel. When the meeting ended, Daniel turned to me with a quiet smile, one that conveyed understanding, patience, and victory without arrogance. I knew that we had reached a turning point. My father left the room first, his pride intact but his desperation thinly disguised. As we walked out, I felt a sense of triumph that I had never experienced before. Not because we had taken revenge, but because we had proven that love, determination, and integrity are stronger than wealth, power, or control. Daniel held my hand, and I realized that we had not only survived the storm, we had transformed into a team that no one could undermine. That day, I understood the true meaning of resilience, and I knew that nothing could ever shake us again. I also realized that my father had underestimated me, underestimated us, and that underestimation would teach him a lesson he would never forget. The weeks that followed the meeting were nothing short of extraordinary. My father, who had once dismissed me entirely, began reaching out more frequently, always indirectly, always careful not to show weakness. He sent emails asking for Daniel's insight, messages about strategy, and even invitations to sit in on conference calls. I watched him from a distance, knowing exactly why he was doing it. Every word he typed, every request he made, was proof that our lives had shifted. Daniel remained calm, professional, and respectful, never flaunting his newfound influence. But I could see the subtle satisfaction in his eyes, the quiet acknowledgement that our perseverance had earned respect where it had been denied. I felt a surge of pride, a recognition that our struggles had built something far stronger than any wealth or privilege. My friends noticed the change too. When I shared small glimpses of what was happening, they were amazed. They had witnessed the despair in my eyes 6 months ago, the tears and sleepless nights, and now they saw me walking with confidence, holding my husband's hand, knowing that we had not only survived, but thrived. One evening, my father called Daniel directly, asking for advice on an urgent deal. I could hear his voice on speakerphone, polite but strained, carefully masking the frustration he felt at needing help from the man he had once looked down upon. Daniel responded with clarity, knowledge, and a calm authority that was impossible to ignore. I watched my father's tone change, just slightly, betraying the respect he now had to give. That moment filled me with a complex mix of emotions, vindication, relief, and a quiet joy that we had reached this point without losing ourselves. I realized that this was more than just revenge. It was proof that love, integrity, and determination could outlast arrogance, wealth, and control. We continued to work together on the project, guiding my father when necessary, but always on our terms. Every interaction reminded me that the tables had turned. For the first time in my life, I felt a balance, a power that was rightfully ours, earned through effort, patience, and resilience. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected development occurred. My father invited us to his home for a private discussion, emphasizing that it was urgent. Daniel and I prepared carefully, understanding that this was more than a casual conversation. It was the culmination of 6 months of struggle, growth, and subtle victories. As we arrived, I noticed the subtle changes in the household. The once intimidating aura had softened slightly, the atmosphere tense but more human, more approachable. We were no longer the ones pleading or desperate. We had become the ones in control, the ones who could guide, advise, and even correct. My father greeted us with a polite nod, and I realized in that instant that everything had shifted. The man who had once disowned me now needed us, and this time we were not just ready, we were stronger, wiser, and unshakable. That evening would mark the final stage of transformation, the moment when the past would meet the present and when we would define the future on our terms. The evening with my father was tense from the very beginning. Daniel and I arrived, and I noticed the careful attention my father paid to every detail, as if trying to project control he no longer had. He spoke politely, almost formally, but beneath the words, I could feel his anxiety. He needed Daniel's guidance, and he could not hide it. I sat quietly, observing every expression, every gesture, and I realized that the power dynamics had shifted completely. Daniel listened carefully, offering insight only when asked, never appearing arrogant, but projecting undeniable competence. My father asked questions, sought advice, and carefully considered every suggestion. I could see him struggling to maintain his pride while relying on the very man he had once dismissed. It was astonishing to witness, and I felt a quiet satisfaction that came not from revenge, but from seeing truth and fairness restored. For 6 months, Daniel and I had faced hardship, built a life from scratch, and grown stronger in ways that no wealth could provide. Now, the world seemed to recognize our strength. The discussion continued, and my father admitted, subtly and without words, that he underestimated us. I noticed the small gestures, the hesitant nods, the pauses, the quiet acknowledgement of Daniel's knowledge. It was as if he was learning respect for the first time. At one point, he leaned back and sighed, a sound that carried years of pride, frustration, and realization. I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and an almost overwhelming sense of justice. Our lives had been turned upside down, yet we had emerged stronger than ever. After the meeting, we walked to the car, Daniel holding my hand firmly, and I realized that the struggle, the tears, and the sacrifices were all worth it. We had not only survived, but we had transformed. My father never openly admitted defeat, but his reliance on Daniel was undeniable. That moment marked a turning point. I no longer felt powerless or abandoned. I had learned the strength of perseverance, the value of love, and the importance of integrity. Daniel and I returned home, reflecting on the journey we had endured. The apartment we once worried about now felt like a home, filled with laughter, hope, and accomplishment. We understood that true power comes not from wealth or status, but from resilience, compassion, and courage. That night, I sent a quiet message to my father, expressing gratitude for his willingness to seek advice and acknowledging the lessons learned. He responded with a short note, formal but respectful, and I knew that the past conflicts were behind us. We had transformed the relationship, setting boundaries and earning respect without compromise. 6 months ago, I felt abandoned and powerless. Now, I felt unstoppable. I understood the depth of my own strength and the incredible support of Daniel. Our love, combined with determination and integrity, had created a life that could not be shaken. The lesson was clear: no obstacle, no betrayal, and no attempt at control could break us. We had emerged victorious, not through anger or revenge, but through courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to one another. That evening marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a future defined by our choices, our resilience, and our undeniable strength. And I knew, without a doubt, that nothing could ever take that away from us.